The Crimean War of 1854 to 56 was fought between the forces of Russia and an alliance formed by the French, the British, the Ottomans and the Sardinians, and was mainly fought around the Black Sea region, including of course the Crimean Peninsula. But not entirely, because 3,000 miles to the north, another almost forgotten campaign in this conflict was played out in the cold waters of the Baltic Sea. A campaign that, despite the Finns remembering it, would probably have been forgotten to most people if it wasn't for the actions of one brave young Royal Navy officer, who was to be awarded the very first Victoria Cross. With war looming in 1854, the British and French decided to send a combined fleet to the Baltic Sea, and the aim of the operation was threefold. First, it was to place an economic blockade on both Russia and their autonomous region of the Grand Duchy of Finland. Secondly, it was to confine the main Russian fleet to the Baltic Sea, preventing them from sailing all the way around to the Crimea. To achieve that, the Allies would attack the fortresses at Sveaborg outside Helsinki, Bomarsund on the Åland Islands between the Grand Duchy of Finland and Sweden, and above all, the home of Russia's Baltic fleet, at Kronstadt, close to the Russian capital of St. Petersburg. Who knows? With Kronstadt actually out of action, maybe the Anglo-French fleet could actually have a major PR coup and bombard the Russian capital itself. And the final aim was to encourage Sweden to join the alliance and try to retake territories that they had lost to Russia in recent memory, not least Finland itself. On the 11th of March 1854, 2 weeks before war was declared, a Royal Navy fleet under Admiral Sir Charles Napier set sail from Spithead. It was the largest fleet that Britain had assembled since the Napoleonic Wars 40 years previously. And as they sailed through the North Sea, they were joined by their French allies. If you've watched some of my other Crimean War videos, you will know that Britain's state of readiness after 40 years of peace was certainly lacking at the outset of the Crimean War, and the Royal Navy was no different. Napier, who had joined the Navy back in the previous century, was now 70 years old, and most of his captains weren't far behind him. Whilst the Royal Navy was starting to employ steam-powered ships, Napier's commanders generally lacked combat experience in them. And furthermore, the Royal Navy was so short of ammunition that gunnery practice en route to the Baltic was forbidden. The 40 years of peace since the Napoleonic Wars had also meant that the Royal Navy, and indeed their French counterparts, had had no reason to sail to the Baltic, and consequently their nautical maps were sparse, especially concerning the depths of water around Russia's naval bases and fortifications. Admiral Napier ordered Captain Hall to take a shallow draft paddle steamer, HMS Hecla, ahead of the fleet to make a reconnaissance of the Baltic. The Hecla was a 6-gunned paddle sloop launched back in 1839. Under Captain Hall, she carried out her mission in the Baltic with speed and efficiency, outrunning Russian frigates on several occasions. With war formally declared on the 27th of March, the fleet entered the Baltic. It was going to be a race against time, because the campaign would be constrained by the weather. Freezing seas in the autumn would curtail operations until the following year. Having said that, if during this summer period they could neutralise Russia's Baltic fleet, then that fleet itself would be bottled up until the following spring and unable to play a part in the Crimean War. Indeed, it was the freezing seas in the Russians' Baltic ports that was driving the Russians to seek an all-weather port somewhere in the south, like Constantinople, the capital of the Ottoman Empire. The Allies sailed into the Gulf of Finland and arrived off Kronstadt, but then they hesitated, trying to work out what to do next. For over a week, the Tsar, in his palace at the Peterhof, could see the masts of the Allied enemy ships on the horizon. Eventually, Napier and the French Admiral decided that a naval bombardment alone would not be enough to capture the Russian base. Troops or marines would be needed to be landed to storm it, and they simply didn't have enough of them to hand. Meanwhile, the Russian fleet decided it was safer to stay in their base than risk venturing out for a battle with the combined French and British fleets. By now, The Allied fleet had been in the Baltic for nearly 2 months with nothing to show for their efforts. The Admiralty in London were starting to feel the pressure from the popular press, who were asking what Napier was doing in the Baltic. And the admirals demanded that Napier seize the initiative. But where? With both Kronstadt and Sveaborg deemed to be impregnable, Napier looked for an easier option. And on the 21st of June 1854, he ordered Captain Hall in HMS Hecla, along with 2 other paddle steamers, HMS Odin and HMS Valorous, to bombard the fortress at Bomarsund on the Åland Islands. Having negotiated the shallow waters, at 9 p.m. they dropped anchor and commenced firing their 38 guns at the fortification. Now, despite not being complete, indeed only 2 of its 12 planned towers would ever be completed, the fort was equipped with 100 guns, and they started to return fire. The First Battle of Bomarsund probably doesn't really deserve that title. I mean, it was more of an artillery duel between the fortress with its 100 guns and 3 British ships with 38 guns, which lasted until the early hours of the next morning. It was early on in this exchange of gunfire that disaster nearly befell HMS Hecla, and the ensuing bravery of one junior officer would create history. Mate Charles Davis Lucas had been born in 1834 in County Armagh, Ireland. He'd enlisted in the Royal Navy when he was just 13, and now 7 years later he had been promoted to mate. It was during this cannon exchange between the Royal Navy paddle steamers and the Russian fort that a live shell landed on the deck of the Hecla, its fuse still burning brightly. Panic seized the ship and the order was given for the crew to lie down and take cover. Ignoring that order, as only a young man can, Lucas ran over to the shell, picked it up and calmly threw it overboard. Before it even hit the water, there was a huge explosion. Apart from 2 sailors receiving minor wounds, no crewmen were killed or seriously injured, and the ship was totally unharmed. Captain Hall promoted him to lieutenant on the spot and commended his actions to Napier, pointing out his, quote, great coolness and presence of mind. But more was to follow. Upon hearing of Lucas's actions, Admiral Napier took up his cause, wrote to the Admiralty Lords in London, informing them of Captain Hall's decision to promote Lucas and urging them to confirm this promotion with the utmost haste, which they did. Next up, the Royal Humane Society awarded Lucas their gold medal. This award has nothing to do with the military, and it is not a military decoration. The Royal Humane Society had been formed back in the 1770s, and it recognises acts of bravery which save other people's lives, and they do so to this very day. It's probably worth a video in its own right, because there have been some notable winners of this prestigious award, specifically for saving the lives of other people, and not because of any of their other accomplishments. They include a Victorian engineer, Isamard Kingdom Brunel, a Dracula author, Bram Stoker, and more recently, Olympic swimmer Duncan Goodhue. But it wasn't that award that earned Lucas his place in history. It's because he was the first person to win the Victoria Cross. Britain's highest medal for valour was established by royal warrant in January 1856. And unlike its predecessors, Queen Victoria insisted that it was open to all ranks. By this stage, early 1856, the Crimean War was winding down, but Queen Victoria wanted to recognise acts of bravery from the war. Because we're almost at the end of the war, most of them were awarded for retrospective actions. And the very first of those actions was that of Charles Davis Lucas on board HMS Hecla on the 21st of June 1854. Lucas was one of the 85 names announced in the London Gazette on the 24th of February 1857, and on the 26th of June, same year, he attended the very first award ceremony. The ceremony itself was held in London's Hyde Park with a crowd of over 100,000 in attendance. Queen Victoria herself presented each Victoria Cross. Now, despite being the first action to be recommended for a VC, Lucas was not actually the first man to have a medal put on his chest. The Victoria Crosses were handed out with strict military protocol, with the Royal Navy as the senior service going ahead of the army that day. And the medals were then distributed by rank, with the highest rank first. And thus it was that a more senior Royal Navy officer than Lucas was actually the first man to have the VC pinned to his chest. And I mean pinned to his chest. On the 18th of June 1855, a full year after Lucas's heroics, Commander Henry James Raby had run 70 yards across open ground to rescue a man who had been shot in both legs. And as the most senior Royal Navy man gazetted, he was now first in line at Hyde Park. Queen Victoria insisted on remaining on her horse for the whole ceremony, and as she leant down to pin the medal to Raby's tunic, she actually went through his tunic and pierced his skin. In true heroic Victorian fashion, Raby didn't even flinch, as the first man to receive the Victoria Cross literally had it pinned to his chest. Lieutenant Lucas, as I said earlier, the Admiralty had willingly confirmed his promotion, was fourth in line, and by now the Queen had got the hang of pinning medals onto tunics rather than into flesh from up there on her horse. Those very first Victoria Crosses were made, and they continue to be made, by London jewellers Hancock's & Co., whose shop is in the Burlington Arcade in London. The traditional story is the medals came from a captured Russian cannon from the siege of Sevastopol. Now, this actually seems to be based upon a newspaper report from that Hyde Park ceremony, and apart from that newspaper story, there is no record of where the jewellers got their metal to make those initial Victoria Crosses. Research in 2020 by retired Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Andrew Marriott actually suggests that whilst those initial VCs might have come from a captured Russian cannon, it seems that more recent VCs since the First World War seem to have come from a Chinese gun that was captured by the British in the 1860s. We all know the Victoria Cross, that bronze medal for valour with its crimson ribbon. But back in 1857, the recipients from the Royal Navy, like Lucas and Raby, actually had blue ribbons, and red was only for those from the army. It was in 1918 that King George V ordered that all Victoria Crosses would be attached to crimson ribbon going forward. Just for the record, the first man from the army to receive the Victoria Cross that day at Hyde Park was Sergeant Major Grieve for his actions during the charge of the Heavy Brigade at the Battle of Balaclava. And there's a link to my video on that particular battle, the Battle of Balaclava, at the end of this video and in the description below. Since its inception, the Victoria Cross has been awarded on 1,358 occasions. It remains the highest award for valour in not only the British Armed Forces, but in many Commonwealth countries too, in particular Australia, Canada and New Zealand. Lucas spent the rest of his career in the Royal Navy, although amazingly, the first winner of the Victoria Cross never saw action again. In 1878, he was summoned to the deathbed of his old captain from HMS Hecla in the Crimean War, Captain Hall, who begged him to look after his daughter. Charles Davis Lucas married Frances Hall, and they had 3 daughters. He finished up as a Rear Admiral on the retired list and died on the 7th of August 1914, just 3 days after Britain had entered its next European war, World War I. The first Victoria Cross hero is buried in St Lawrence's churchyard in the village of Mereworth in Kent. The bombardment of Bomarsund fort back in 21st of June 1854 had achieved very little. Indeed, if it hadn't been for mate Charles Lucas becoming the first winner of the VC, it would hardly even be a footnote in the Crimean War story. Outgunned, the 3 Royal Navy ships weighed anchor and sailed away. But at the end of July, the Royal Navy were back, and this time they meant business, with 25 ships. At the beginning of August, 9,000 French troops were actually landed on the island, accompanied by 900 Royal Marines. And on the 13th of August, the French artillery commenced a bombardment of the fort. With the Royal Navy now laying down a barrage of fire from out at sea, within 2 days the Russian defenders had surrendered, and the partially constructed fort was destroyed by the Allies. The Baltic Campaign was always going to be a prisoner of the winter weather. And with the temperatures dropping in the autumn, the Anglo-French fleet took one more look at Kronstadt before sailing home for the winter. The following year, Admiral Richard Dundas returned with an Anglo-French fleet to the Baltic. There they sailed to the fort and dockyards at Sveaborg, and despite having 77 ships and laying down a barrage of 20,000 shells, their attack achieved very little. With the Russian fleet still refusing to give battle, and the Allied fleet unable to get close to them due to the deployment by the Russians of a new-fangled weapon, sea mines, the two navies were at a stalemate. By the time the winter once more closed down the 1855 Baltic Campaign, the Royal Navy had achieved no greater military success than they had under the much maligned Admiral Napier, and once more they sailed for home. The Baltic Campaign rapidly disappeared from people's memories. Actually, it had hardly registered in the first place. Unlike down on the Crimean Peninsula, there were no epic battles or victories like Alma or Inkerman. No major naval bases were captured, unlike Sevastopol. No complete blunders like the charge of the Light Brigade. And actually any logistical problems the fleet had paled into insignificance compared to the supply problems, the medical neglect and the harsh winters down in the Crimea. Admittedly, the Swedes never did join the war, but the Baltic Campaign did achieve its other strategic aims. The Russian Baltic fleet was never able to sail to the Black Sea. And if they had, maybe things would have turned out very differently in the Crimean War. Moreover, the very threat posed by the Anglo-French fleet to both his ships and to his capital forced the Tsar to keep over 30,000 troops in the region, rather than sending them south to the Crimea. The economic blockade also put a strain on the Russian economy, which probably forced the Tsar to accept less than favourable terms in the peace treaty that was signed in 1856. And all of this Allied strategic success in the Baltic was achieved without the loss of a single ship. But in fairness, the Baltic Campaign would have disappeared from view completely had it not been for the actions of Charles Davis Lucas off the coast of Finland on the 21st of June 1854. As I said earlier, since its inception the Victoria Cross has been awarded 1,358 times. There are so many incredible stories that could be told, not least some of the men who have been awarded the VC not once but twice. And also, how about the 3 father-son VC winners? But of all the stories, no one can take away Charles Lucas's place in history. The very first person to be awarded the Victoria Cross. Charles Davis Lucas, VC. Well, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that story that combined the first Victoria Cross with the almost forgotten battle and campaign in the Crimean War. More stories from the Crimean War coming your way, plus the first British victory in World War I, probably not where you think it was, and the 3 father-son VC winners. I thought we'd do a story about them as well. Also, by popular demand, Admiral Sir Thomas Cochrane, he's on his way too. In the meantime, stay well, and I hope to see you very soon.